broken ski pole, they tried to show me how to use the pointer thing on the computer. And every time I would touch it, everything would go wrong. I would go onto the wrong slide or something. So I have a very high-tech solution for using a pointer. Anyway, you'll notice that it says personal reminiscence. So I'm just warning you that this is quite a personal talk. It's not going to be very technical. I put a few technical things in, but anyway. And most of the photos were taken by me. Some I got online, but the ones that are kind of fuzzy are the ones I took. Okay. So this is going to be about the lost villages of the St. Lawrence Seaway. And you notice on the map here, we have the river, which is, get this pointer. In the center is the original river, the way it was before the flooding. And then the lighter blue shows it after the flooding, where covered a lot of the property. So, and well, we'll come to the names later, but so that's what that is. So the Lost Villages refers to the towns, hamlets, and farmlands that were flooded when the dams were built on the St. Lawrence River to create the St. Lawrence Seaway. This was between Cornwall, Ontario on the east side and Iroquois, Ontario on the west side. The flooding also affected New York State on the south side from Messina on the east towards Ogdensburg on the west. But not as many people were displaced in New York State, and I'm not going to say much about that side. When looking for more information, I found the PhD thesis of a historian called Rosemary O'Flaherty, called Damming the Remains, Traces of the Lost Seaway Communities. I worked my way through the 257 pages of the PDF and learned a whole lot more about this time in history. I especially learned a lot about the effects on the New York State side, which I was mostly ignorant of before. Reading this brought back a lot of memories. So I've got this talk separated into three parts. The first one, why was the St. Lawrence Seaway created, and did it accomplish its objectives? And part two, what was it like before the flooding? And part three, the construction of the Seaway. So why was the St. Lawrence Seaway created? In the past, the size of ships which could travel from Montreal to the Great Lakes was limited in the 61-kilometer section between Cornwall and Iroquois. The Cornwall Canal was one of 8 canals that connected Western Canada with the ocean by way of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. Constructed in 1834 to 1842 to overcome the rapids of the Long Sault, it was enlarged several times between 1876 and 1904, and then superseded by the St. Lawrence Seaway in 1958. The original village of Millrush, that's the way we said it, where I was born and grew up, had been cut off from the mainland by the Cornwall Canal construction. Over time, the village expanded on the north side, which was where I lived. Across the canal was Old Millrush. My mother's uncle lived in the Old Millrush, and I used to go there to practice my Highland dancing while he played the fiddle. The village of Millrush was close to the Long Sault Rapids. The Seaway construction was during my final years of high school and my time at Queen's University in Kingston. I was not adventurous in those days, but my sister Margie, who was 8 years older than I, was quite brave. She shot the rapids in a canoe with her boyfriend. Since I graduated from high school in Cornwall in June of 1956, I missed a lot of the upheaval involved in the Seaway construction, but my family and friends there kept me informed. So this shows the, oh, what happened? Okay, that's the Long Sault Rapids, which were the sticking point for the boats. And this shows a ship in the Cornwall Canal beside the rapids. You can see them in the background. This one shows taken from the other side, and you can see a ship at the back, which is in the canal, and the rapids in front here. Now this shows the Rapids Prince, which was a tourist boat, which would, well, I think you can read what's on the bottom there. I can't read it very well. Anyway, she was the last passenger ship to do so in 1949. The run was from Prescott. Okay, there's the Rapids Prince, and here's another one of the Rapids Prince with people watching from the shore on Cheeks Island. Now, to show you that it did accomplish its objectives, which were to enlarge the shipping canal and also to build a hydroelectric dam to provide power to Ontario and New York State. A new era of marine transportation was made possible by construction of the 306-kilometer stretch of the St. Lawrence Seaway between Montreal and Lake Ontario during the mid to late 1950s. Recognized as one of the most challenging engineering feats in history, 7 locks were built, 5 Canadian and 2 US, in order to lift vessels 75 meters above sea level as they transit from Montreal to Lake Ontario. The Seaway is considered to be one of the engineering marvels of the 20th century. The fact that the US and Canada, mainly New York State and the province of Ontario, cooperated fully in building these massive projects on a river dividing the two countries is a poignant reminder of our past partnerships. I read that the US was initially reluctant to cooperate, probably because the railways thought it would cut into their profits, until Canada planned to do it alone, and that spurred the US to join the project. On April 25th, 1959, I keep touching this thing, the icebreaker d'Iberville began the first through transit of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was officially opened by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and President Dwight D. Eisenhower of the United States on June 26th of that year. Okay. So what was it like before the flooding? Well, the places that were flooding were my village, which was Millrush. That's how we pronounce it, just like Rapid des Swashim became Swisha. The name came from the quarries back of Millrush, which supplied rocks to build the embankment of the Cornwall Canal during 1834 to 1842. And this shows, we called it the Limekill Quarry. And we used to play around there when we were children. It wasn't far from my home, obviously, because I never ventured very far. And my brothers and other kids, the boys would jump into the quarry, but I don't think I ever did. I don't remember. But anyway, I can remember playing around there, obviously, because I took this picture. And this one shows it, some of where the water and the rocks, and they would play around in there. And this shows, if you see, I guess I can point it out, you can see the Limekill over here, just amongst the trees. That the same structure. Okay, this is an aerial view of Millrush looking downriver, and you can see the Cornwall Canal was this part, way over here, and you can actually see a ship in the canal, and this barrier here was for a power dam. So this is the outlet from the power dam, and then part of the water came around here from the canal, went down through here and out there, and then some of it came down here, which we called the weir, and I'll have some pictures of that too. This doesn't show my part of the town. This was old Millrush, and my uncle, the one that played the fiddle, was in one of these houses. I don't remember exactly which one, but I know it was one of those. So this is looking upstream. So there's the bridge that you had to cross over to get to the old Millrush, and there's the village is up here, and you can see there's a paper mill here, and the paper mill was one of the principal industries in the village. I think I have a better picture than I have the next one. Yeah, this one I got off the, well, a lot of these are off the internet, obviously. And this one shows, so there's the arena, and I'll have something to say about the arena, which was one of the main places to have recreation in the village. And this is the paper mill. It took up quite a bit. I never actually was in that paper mill. I used to walk. Our school was back here, so I had to walk along in front of that to get to school every day. And this big water tower here was always a kind of a fascinating thing. And then you could go across the bridge too. It says about the bridge. It was floated downstream at the time of inundation and now rests in the Lachine Rapids in Montreal. So I didn't know that before. And this shows a map of Millrush. It's pretty hard to see any details, but you can see that the main CNR railway went through here. And this was the main highway. If you drove from Montreal to Toronto, you had to go on that highway, so we passed through there then. That was long before the 401 was built. And my house I was on the other side of the tracks. I think I had to go up a hill here. I think my house was right about there. And this shows my brother, not my brother, yes, it was my brother, my younger brother, Peter, and two friends on the swing bridge over the canal. And you can see the paper mill in the background too, just off to the left. And this is the weir that I mentioned, where the part of the water that wasn't being used for the power dam to go down. This is looking down river from it. And then this shows the bottom, the part below. And we used to go walk down there and we would swim. We would swim in there, actually, the kids. So that was quite an exciting place. And this shows a picture of some people at the wharf. And you can see the bridge in the background. So this is upriver from the bridge, where there was a wharf for the original Cornwall Canal. And it had a ledge. You can see one boy standing below. So he's on the ledge down below, and the others are sitting up in the top layer. And you can see it in this picture too. We're standing on, that's me with my niece and nephew, standing at the top on the wharf. And just in the background, you can see what we call the towpath across. It was 150 feet, I think. What did I say? I forget. Anyways, so that was the big test when you learned to swim. First of all, you would start on the ledge, and then you'd learn to jump off the top part, and then eventually you'd swim over, and if you could get to the towpath, then you were a good swimmer then. And this is the powerhouse that was also, that supplied power to the village. And that's the lower side of it. The water comes through the bottom there. And this is a picture of the upper side. And now, at the present time, the remains of that powerhouse are still underwater. I don't know why they didn't take it all away. They cleared almost everything else away. Anyway, scuba divers can go down there. And there's actually, somebody has made a sketch of this, which I thought was very neat. It shows the 3 levels of the power dam at 35, 55, and 75 feet depths. There's quite a current there apparently, so it's for expert divers. And I actually took scuba diving training thinking that someday I would be able to come back and go down and see where I used to live. And my dad said, well, you wouldn't see anything, they took everything away. So, and I never did actually scuba dive there, so. And this is the sidewalk where we walked to school. You can see the paper mill. And there's the water tower, the famous water tower. And this shows it also. And then here's the front of it, which was kind of a mysterious place to me because I never was in there. But I climbed up the water tower with my little brownie camera, and I took pictures. By that time, we knew that it was going to be flooded, so I thought, I'll take some pictures. So there I was, snapping pictures up in the top of the water tower. So that shows downriver. You can see the bridge there. This shows the wharf where the kids swim, and the towpath where they would swim over to. And then you can just see the, kind of dimly, the power dam over there. So you could swim from here to here, and if you were really brave, there was a park here. You could actually swim to that park. But you had to be careful because the ships, that's where they came down. So if there was a ship coming, you wouldn't want to be swimming there. I'm not sure if I ever actually swam over that far, but I certainly did swim to the towpath. And this is another one looking upriver, and you can actually see where the old canal was on this side. But then it was enlarged for bigger ships. So, and this is the final one showing the looking west, and it shows more of the houses. And there, now you can see the arena, and the arena was a very important part because all winter, of course, we would have skating there, and then in the summer they would have dances, and people would come from a long ways around for these dances. So it was a great entertainment for people. This is a clipping from the newspaper. I have many I have photo albums, and then I also had scrapbooks of cuttings from the paper. And this one shows an actual ship going down the canal outside, and this was the old one with somebody in, and that could very well have been one of my brothers on the boat, but I'm not sure. But they certainly did go with their boat to do that. And another thing they did in the winter there on the canal was when it froze nice and smooth like that, they would play hockey on it. And there you can see again the paper mill, not the water tower, but the other stack. And then this at the right-hand side is half of the school where we walked to. Now this is a very sad picture. The building in the center, there was a fire. It was the post office. My dad was the postmaster there, and there was a fire, and there was an apartment in behind and up above, and 2 children actually died in the fire. And I remember going down. I must have been going to that's where we catch the school bus. I had to take the school bus to get to Cornwall for high school. And my dad was still going in and trying to rescue stuff from the post office because it was the end of the month apparently, and all the checks had come in for whoever got checks from the government, and he was trying to rescue them. And I was really frightened. I said, "Dad, don't go in, don't keep going in there." He said, "Okay, I won't go in anymore." So then they moved the post office to just a private house along another street. So that shows my dad on the steps, 1954. And then my dad retired. And you might notice he doesn't have a left arm. He was in the First World War and lost his arm by shrapnel injuries. But he managed quite well with one arm. I don't. My son Jay always says if he can't use one hand, he says, I don't know how my grandfather managed with one arm. And I wasn't too good at doing a panoramic picture, but I managed to piece three together to show the shoreline, and then you can see the famous water tower there. This is taken, the powerhouse would be just here. And this was our school. It was 4 rooms, I think, 2 grades to each room. It was just grades 1 to 8. There was never any kindergarten, and you started in grade 1. Actually, I started and they put me in grade 2 because I had a lot of older brothers and sisters and they taught me how to read. So when I started school, I could already read, so they put me in grade 2. This is in front of the school. It's a memorial to the people from the village who were in the war. And 2 of my uncles actually were killed in the war, and their names are on there. And this is the chapel, the Roman Catholic chapel. Our main church was in Dickinson's Landing, which was farther up the river, but we had this chapel. And they had this little organ there, with what we called a pump organ. And I used to play it because I took piano lessons. And in order to do a pump organ, you had to keep your feet going steadily all the time to keep the power while your hands were playing the music. So, and the feet weren't doing anything in time with the hands, so it was kind of a acquired skill. Now it shows the school and the church side by side. So those are familiar sights for me. Now, this was our railway tracks at Millrosh, and I couldn't do that today for sure. I'd fall off the rails if I tried to do it, but that shows the rail, and that was actually almost in my backyard. Our property went right out to the railway, so we got used to the trains going by all the time. This is looking west the other way, and so our property is on the right-hand side of that. And in the summer, well, I don't think I did it in the winter, but you could take a shortcut. If you didn't want to go all the way down to the corner on the road, you could go over the tracks, making sure that no trains were coming. This was our property, looking from the railway to our property. And my father was a beekeeper as well as being the postmaster. And so you can see the beehives there. And this was a picture, I must have taken it from the bedroom. I think you can see the screen. Eastern view, you can see the honey house where they take the stuff off the beehives to get the honey out of it. And then you can see the railway and the paper mill stack. And this was our house in March. So you can see there were trees there, but no leaves on them, of course. So it shows the house quite fully. This shows with all the trees, with all the leaves on it. And this was the thing that I think my parents really appreciated, was having all these beautiful trees around, keep a house cool in the summer. And so they had a party at the end, and you see all the cars gathered for a party. This was up the road. Our house was in the center there, and neighbors on the side. I don't know, it's not a very important picture, but. And this was a very important part of our life, in fact, for the whole village, because there weren't many stores. So this store supplied the basics. I can remember my mother sending me down to the store, and I'll get a, I forget how many pounds it would be, maybe an 8-pound roast of beef, and that would be our Sunday dinner. And then there was another store farther away, which was more of a meat market. So This was the main church of the parish at Dickinson's Landing. And you can see it's right by the river. If you look, you see back on the left-hand side, that's the Cornwall Canal again. Now, this is a little story. My second oldest brother got married, and then they had a house, and it was going to be flooded. So he took it upon himself to arrange to have it moved out of the flood zone ahead of the official moving that the hydro did. So he arranged all that. So he got the house up on a mover. And I talked to my brother, well, all the older ones are, well, he's passed away. But his wife is still living. She's 93, 94.
Born in 1929.
Anyway, she's in her 90s. And I talked to her, I asked her about moving the house. And she said, oh yeah, it was really scary because they couldn't go on the road because it was too high. It would, because of the telephone lines and the hydro lines. So they had to go across the field. And she said that was really scary, seeing the house go rumbling across the field behind this truck. And then they were putting in the new basement in it. And this is the finished, where you can see that chimney on the left side. That was added afterwards because they put a fireplace in. So it eventually looks quite nice. And my brother, Jim, was in business with my father with the beekeeping. So when he moved the house, he had to build a new honey house. So there he's building it. Well, you could call it a garage, but he used it as a honey house as well. So this is the finished product after the flooding. It shows where the new, there are two new locks for the shipping. So the ships would come down this way through these are on the American side, Eisenhower Lock and the Snell Lock. And then this part of the river comes in and goes to the Long Sault Dam, which is a power dam. So it covers quite a lot of area. There's the dam here. Yeah, the Long Sault Dam, that was it. So that was the engineering part of it. Okay, this major project had to be completed in stages, starting in August 1954, in order to prevent any disruption of shipping. A diversion channel had to be built in the Cornwall Canal between locks 19 and 20 to bypass the site of the new Moses Saunders Dam. This also provided, I'll go back and show you that. So the power dam. It also provided the location of the gate in the dike, which would be closed the day before the flooding took place. So when they closed that up, then the flooding could start. Temporary dikes and cofferdams had to be built to divert or stop water flow through areas of construction sites. A new control dam from New York State, mainland to Barnard Island, was built in stages in order to maintain flow down the river. Cuts through Long Sault Island were necessary for water diversion and a new shipping canal. So there's the construction. Now this cofferdam, the tower on the left is located on Long Sault Island. The tower on the right is on the bank of the Cornwall Canal, just below Lock 21 at Dickinson's Landing. The dam was built out from the banks of the river. Once the gap narrowed to less than 100 yards, the force of the water washed most of the rocks dropped into the current downstream. The closure of the gap became nearly an impossibility, as single chunks of stone weighing over 20 tons were dropped into the gap, only to be washed away. Finally, a device built out of welded girders with 6 steel legs, called a hexapedian, was dropped into the gap. The first one was washed away, but the second was loaded with large stones shortly after it was dropped into place. Finally, the dam was complete after 7 months of work. The building of Cofferdam E began with the construction of 2 towers used to drop loads of rock, up to 25 tons, into the Long Sault Rapids. Beginning in the fall of 1956, the work carried on throughout the winter until April 1957. 2 new lift locks were built on the U.S. side of the river. A 10-mile shipping canal connecting the new lake was created above the dams to the river and below the city of Cornwall. Dikes were built on both sides of the river to control flooding inland once the new Lake St. Lawrence was created. So here's railway tracks that you saw that I was walking along. They removed all these. I guess they could use the metal from the things. Oh, I'll show you that. This was the dam. The shipping moving up and down this passed through this diversion canal instead of the Cornwall Canal, so they would not interfere with the work on the power phase of the St. Lawrence Seaway. And this is very sad because this shows the rapids drained and all the rocks underneath. The trees had to be cut down for the places where it was flooded because I suppose if they were left there, they would rot away and then they would probably float up and be a hazard to the shipping. So they had to cut down all these trees. So this shows some of them being cut. But some people complained, the ones in the village said that they were cutting them too soon. And they were cutting them down, looks like winter. But when you see how the trees look so different from when there weren't any leaves and when there were, it would be a lot harder to cut them when the leaves were all on. So I think it probably was part of the plan to cut them when they didn't have the leaves. A new control dam from New York State mainland to Barnhart Island was built in stages in order to maintain flow down the river. Cuts through Long Sault Island were necessary for water diversion and a new shipping canal. I said all that. Many of the inhabitants who were displaced moved into the new towns, originally called Newtown Number 1 and Newtown Number 2. They finally gave them names, Ingleside and Long Sault, which are there now, before the flooding, which took place on July the 4th, 1958. Some chose to sell their house to Hydro and move to a different place. My parents took this option, and they bought a house in Cornwall, which was less than 10 miles away from the village of Millrush, where they raised their family of 10 children. My mother said she couldn't see moving to Long Sault and facing all that mud for at least a year, because she still had, my older brother was injured in a car accident and he was in a wheelchair. So she didn't want to be have to handle that. So she was actually quite happy with their purchase of a house in Cornwall. So some people were very, very unhappy with this. In fact, I recently read a report that was written, somebody interviewed my parents in 1977, and my mother said my youngest brother, he would have been around 12 at the time, I guess, was really upsetting for him. And so she sent him off to her sisters out in the country for 6 weeks while the flooding was taking place, because he was so upset by the whole thing. So I had finished high school in June of 1956 while the construction was underway. So by the time my parents moved, I had been away at Queen's University in Kingston and had a summer job in Toronto, and I missed all that. So it was not as upsetting to me as it was to my two younger brothers still at home. An older brother, who was also going to Queen's University at that time, had a short-term job in the construction. He described this as carrying rocks to build a dam. The final coffer dam for the Moses Saunders Power Dam, a key component of the St. Lawrence Seaway, was dynamited on July the 1st, 1958, an event locally remembered as Inundation Day. This controlled demolition, using 27 metric tons of explosives, allowed the waters of the St. Lawrence to flood the newly created head pond behind the dam, eventually submerging the lost villages and other areas. I remember getting a letter from a friend who was still in Cornwall when the final dam was dynamited to start the flooding. She said a huge amount of the dam flew up in the air and came back down again in the same spot. So instead of a torrent, it was a trickle. This may be exaggerated a bit, as my friend liked to tell funny stories. The only verification I could find is that it took 4 days for the flooding to be completed, and that the blast was unspectacular. The St. Lawrence Seaway, a monumental engineering feat, was constructed between 1954 and 1959. It involved building 7 locks and deepening navigation channels alongside the 2,090 megawatt Moses Saunders powerhouse. This project significantly altered the landscape and impacted surrounding communities. I was not aware of any organized objection to this construction. It seemed that the people affected by this just accepted the changes as part of the price of development. However, in Rosemary O'Flaherty's thesis, she describes at length the reactions of the people after some time and their desire to keep remembrance of the past, eventually forming the Lost Villages Historical Society. I think that this forced relocation of these villages might be compared to the Indigenous and Inuit relocations which were forced by the government. But I think that the impact was not nearly as great. After all, the people from the lost villages of the St. Lawrence Seaway could be still fairly close to their former abodes, and their way of life would not be drastically changed for the most part. The workers at the paper mill, it closed up, and a lot of them moved to Thorold, Ontario, where there was another paper mill. I know that's what some of our friends did. However, in Rosemary O'Flaherty's thesis, she describes at length the reactions of the people after some time. Oh, I said that. I think that this, oh, I said that too. Where am I? For my family, it meant that my father would no longer be postmaster of the village, but he was at the age of retirement, so that was ending anyway. I think the thing that hurt the most is that you weren't close to the river anymore. I'm lucky that I ended up in Deep River and close to a beautiful river, even if it isn't the St. Lawrence. Also, the low-lying islands in the Pacific, such as the Tuvalu, which are threatened with extinction by the rising ocean, are facing the same problem of having to be relocated if it is not possible or feasible to keep living there. In this case, though, their choices are not so easily laid out, and they may have to relocate thousands of miles away. To me, this is such a sad picture. There's that water tower. So they had to knock it down because I guess it could be a hazard, although I'm sure the water would cover it, but they had to get rid of all this stuff. And here's some more of the construction. This shows the building of the dam. More building. And they were able to move this church. Some things I think they're not able to. I don't know if it was brick houses they weren't able to move because the brick would fall apart. But it seemed that the wooden houses could be moved all right. So this shows the Anglican Church from Molinette, which is the next village up, moving into Upper Canada Village. So it's there now as a historical thing. And this was our house. This was from the back, showing it getting ready to be moved. And there's my parents. After they'd moved, they came back to see, and the big space behind them is where our house stood. The house next door was still there for some reason. I don't know why it hadn't been moved yet. And that shows looking out to the corner of the street. And there's another home. You can see the arena there just at the top. My father's standing there, and you can see it above his head is the arena. And that shows more of the devastation. This was the house they bought in Cornwall, which it served them quite well. Then it was close to the center of town, so. And this was our house after it was moved to Long Sault. And my youngest brother arranged, my youngest brother, the one that was really so upset, he actually ended up in a job in Ottawa. But when he retired, he moved back to Long Sault. So I think it was always still part of him that he wanted to go back. And so one time he got to know the people that lived in that house. And so he took us for a tour of it. And so we got into the house. And it was so strange for me to go into this house. It was all different. Of course, they'd renovated. The kitchen didn't look the same. And it all looked different. There was just one corner. I said, oh, yes, I recognize this part of it. But that was a very strange experience. And I guess this was one that they couldn't move, so they burned it down. And apparently they did some experiments with fire, studying effects of fires on houses and how people could be rescued and so on. So it was useful from that point of view. Now this is about the power dam. The power generated by the Moses Saunders Power Dam is not physically shared after generation, but is rather produced independently by two separate side-by-side generating stations, one owned by Canada and the other by the USA, with each country receiving output from its own station. The single kilometer-long dam structure houses two distinct generating stations that function independently. On the Canadian side, the Robert H. Saunders Generating Station is owned and operated by Ontario Power Generation, OPG. The station has 16 generating units and a capacity of 1,045 megawatts, which is directed entirely into the Ontario power system. On the US side, the St. Lawrence Franklin D. Roosevelt, or also known as the Robert Moses Power Dam, is operated by the New York Power Authority. This station also has 16 generating units with a capacity of 912 megawatts, and its electricity feeds the New York State power grid. This is similar to the situation at Niagara Falls, which is capable of producing over 4 million kilowatts of electricity, which is shared by the United States and Canada. If you travel to the area west of Cornwall, you can drive or bike the Long Sault Parkway, which is a series of connected islands, which were the higher ground when the flooding occurred. It is bookended by the two new towns, Ingleside and Long Sault. Also, just east of Long Sault is the Lost Villages Museum, which houses artifacts from the flooded area and developed by the Lost Villages Historical Society. Also, in the summer months, I believe you can visit the Moses Saunders Dam in Cornwall. I've got it. And this was after the flooding. The old roads would just run right down into the water like that. And also many of the trees that were cut down, they left the stumps. So sometimes the water is low, so you could actually see these stumps. And there's that big power dam. It's actually quite scenic there. I was able to email Rosemary O'Flaherty this January, and she was very interested in what I put together for the seminar, and she's very keen to see the recording of it. This is what she emailed back to me. A couple of other things the audience might find interesting. In addition to the 6,500 people displaced in Ontario, there were 1,500 displaced in Quebec and 1,100 displaced in New York. A really interesting piece of trivia was the reconfiguration of the Montreal bridges, particularly the Jacques Cartier Bridge. Its span wasn't high enough to allow the ships through, so they built a second span, and on the day it was to be put in place, they cut off the old span and moved the new span in and did it in record time. The traffic on the Jacques Cartier Bridge was only stopped for 1 hour while the swap took place. My final piece of trivia is that the Seaway was already too small the day it went into operation. If your audience ever go and watch the ships lock through, for example at Iroquois, the ships barely make it into the locking chamber with an inch or two to spare on either side. I also read that low water in 2025 restricted drafts to 26 feet 3 inches in the Montreal to Lake Ontario section. And I just made a note that the locks can take ships 730 feet long, 76 feet wide, 38 feet deep in the Eisenhower lock, 43 feet deep in the Snell lock. In low water in 2025 restricted drafts to 26 feet 3 inches in the Montreal to Lake Ontario section. So, and one more picture. So if you go down to that area, you can see the Lost Villages museum, and there's a sign about Mill Rush, my old village. So that's it, folks.
Are there any questions? John?
Was there ever a court action against this project?
Not that I know of.
Just a comment, Ann. I just read the Canadian Geographic magazine this month. I just got one, and it has a little article about Seaway being flooded, and it was about the First Nations that were flooded that really were not happy whatsoever, and many of them were moved far enough away on the other side of the Seaway was, so they didn't have access to the river at all, and their whole way of life changed because they lived on the river, they lived with the fishing and all the, right, so even though again, everybody.
Yes, Rosemary O'Flaherty goes into that quite a bit. She talks about the people on the New York side, and I guess there were some Indigenous people there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're doing fine.
Yeah. So if you read her thesis, you can get it online. She talks about that.
When you were talking earlier on about the mill that's still at the bottom of the lake there, you had a depth of about 75 feet. Is that the height that they have increased the water in the St. Lawrence?
The depth of the water is apparently 80 to 90 feet in places. So I'm not sure.
That's deep river. What was it before?
I saw that one of the churches was taken to Upper Canada Village. Were there any buildings from your town taken to Upper Canada Village?
Yes, I think maybe that corner store that I showed you might be there. I actually haven't been to that. I should go sometime.
Well, what was the height differential, like translation, what's the height of the water level after the flooding in comparison to what it was before the flooding?
Well, according to what I thought heard was it would be 80 feet.
So it's 80 feet deep in addition to what it was before?
Well, it was dry land before, and now there's 80 feet of water above it. But maybe it's only 80 feet where parts where the water was.
Yeah, like even the parts where there's dry land, like it.
Maybe that's not 80 feet. I don't know.
Explaining it.
I'm not too good with the numbers.
name of your town was,
Ville Roche.
that's a French.
Yeah,
French
well,
word.
it's Thousand Rocks. It
Yeah,
got
I
its
know
name
that.
from the rocks that they
Rush
took
is
to build the.
rocks. Any idea why they called it that?
Well, they called it Mill Rush because there was lots of rocks around there.
Okay.
Just like the